afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the masterclass today. I'm Kate Morn. I'm Director of Member Engagement at the Northern Housing Consortium. We've got Brett Jacobson, who's Chief Exec of Mediaworks, and Nick Atkin, Chief Exec of Yorkshire Housing. They're sort of doing a bit of a co-chairing of the session today. The NHC have been working with Mediaworks for about 2 years now. Mediaworks are a digital marketing agency and support a member of the NHC. And really, our supporters just help us to broaden the expertise that we can bring out to the membership through our engagement programme. Mediaworks have led on some really transformational projects, both inside the housing sector and outside. So huge amounts of experience and knowledge in this area. So we're really glad we've kind of come together today to be able to deliver this session. I know they're going to share some case studies from Home Group and Yorkshire Water as well, which I have heard before, but I will not steal your thunder, Brett. I'm going to leave you to talk about those, but some really interesting stats that are coming out of those. Digital transformation obviously has been on the agenda for a really long time, certainly for the housing sector, but I think the pandemic has really accelerated the pace of that. Alongside that, we've also got the social housing white paper and this renewed focus on customers and customer voice. And I think the presentations and discussions today will really look at how we can sort of transform with a customer-centric approach and why digital is going to be absolutely crucial to that transformation. We had a pre-meet with Nick yesterday, and you quite rightly pointed out, Nick, it's also a really exciting time at the minute thinking about what the future of work might look like, should look like, and an opportunity just to make some really fundamental changes, I think, to how we do things. And digital transformation kind of can't be seen in isolation from that either. If I come to you now, Nick, do you just want to tell us a bit more about what you've been doing at Yorkshire Housing on this?
Yeah, sure. So, afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Atkin. I'm Chief Exec at Yorkshire Housing. We do what it says on the tin. We own and manage about 20,000 homes across God's own country of Yorkshire. So it's about 100 miles north to south, 100 miles east to west, and a full mix of all types of housing, from rural right through to your inner city metropolis living. In terms of what we've been doing, I suppose what this has done is the pandemic has just, I suppose, accelerated where we were already heading. So we are now, well, sort of 4 weeks into the pandemic, into lockdown. We had moved forward 3 years. So by June 2020, we were where we thought we'd be in 2023. So all it's done is sort of turbocharge that sort of journey. But certainly, it has brought into sharp focus the fact that the difference between the transactional activity that customers want to have with us in terms of just getting stuff done versus actually the real value added sort of conversational piece that we've had, where we provide more in-depth support and help. But also in terms of you can't, I believe, separate providing a much better and a much enhanced customer offer without then thinking, well, that's inextricably linked to how people work. And I think the thing that's come out of the last sort of 14 months for all of us is a complete shift in how we think about work and the future of work. And I think we've got to a point now where the conversation has rightly, in my view, moved forward to how will we be working in a post-pandemic world. And my view is that'll be a blended approach. And so we've described it at Yorkshire Housing as being a combination of hubs around the patch where we work, some of which we'll own, some of which we won't. So that hub and then home, obviously, bearing in mind that many people now have clearly stated they want to be at home for at least a couple of days a week, and I find that more productive. And then finally, roam. I did have to make sure we got the comms right on this with colleagues, because there were some colleagues in Yorkshire Housing that thought we were going to pay for all of them to go to Rome in Italy. I've said, no, wrong Rome, ROAM. In other words, being able to work anywhere. And given the diversity of the patch and given what I said about the geographic spread, that's equally important as the other two factors. So yeah, quick sort of can opener there, Kate, but I'm sure we'll get to unpack some of that as we go through the session.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. So I hope that the conversation and sort of discussion today is going to be really useful to everyone that's joined us in terms of shaping sort of future plans. As Jason had said at the beginning there, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations, but please do post your questions just in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as we go through. We'll collate those, and then I think the plan is we're going to switch mics on and bring you in to pose your own questions there at the end. So just wait for a little alert to pop up when it's your turn for that. But I think I'll just hand over now, if that's okay, to Brett to get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kate. So I suppose just to kind of introduce 3-4 slides of the context of where today's kind of discussion came from, and this kind of idea of evolution or extinction. So, for us, marketing's changed. The whole world's changed, and I think no more so than the last 12 months, where we've seen a rapid acceleration, like Nick talked about, of digital adoption, personally, professionally. But I suppose for us, there's kind of 4 key stats stand out from that. And this is kind of the way we've architected the talk today around these areas. So data, there's now 250 quintillion bytes of data created every day by a consumer. And I think Dan will correct us during his talk, but I think that's enough to cover the planet in pennies 3 times over, maybe. So it's a lot of data. And if you're not utilizing that data, you're going to be at a disadvantage. Technology, so there's a forecast to be 75 billion connected devices in use by 2025. So again, that kind of user journey, or the way that the channels that we engage with our audiences and our communities and our tenants is evolving at a rapid pace. So it's no longer enough to communicate with them in siloed methods, and it's no longer suitable to ignore certain digital channels in particular, because you have to be where your audience is if you want to communicate effectively. Creativity, so I think with all the content being produced and the noise and the sort of rapid attention-seeking nature of a lot of today's community, apparently a study done, 3 seconds is all you get to grab the attention of either your future customers, your tenants, or communicating a key message before you're probably thumb swiped past. So that creative messaging of how you communicate is going to be critical. And then strategy, there's effectively going to be $2 trillion per year spent on digital transformation by 2023. So, again, as Nick mentioned and as Kate talked about, we've sought with a lot of clients in the housing sector in particular, but across all sectors, where these large scale kind of digital transformation projects that have been on the agenda for maybe even 2 or 3 years have suddenly accelerated, maybe 5 years plus. So it's no longer a time where you can afford to ignore it. I suppose, how's that probably affected housing more in particular? So, again, we've been doing a lot of research in the sector, and a lot of the clients that we've been working with and focus groups have been running. But some of the big ones, again, that kind of pull those out for us is, so 31% increase in 65 to 74-year-olds accessing the internet in the last 12 months. I think, no longer is this just a sort of a 1 demographic or 2 or 3 demographic type challenge, digital or desire. This is your entire tenant base, from start to end. Everybody's wanting to engage digitally, so it's no longer something you can ignore. Technology, 4 or 5 consumers now regularly use apps or digital for online banking or bill payments. I suppose what we saw here is, it's no longer good enough to just be okay in your sector. You have to give your tenants and your users as good a digital experience as they're going to expect in other parts of their daily life. So, it has to match their banking app. It has to match, their utility app, or how they order a pizza via, Just Eat. You have to be giving your tenants the same level of digital engagement, or else, you'll risk upsetting them, or worse yet, losing them. Engagement, there's been a huge increase in the number of how-to or step-by-step, and I suppose kind of self-serve desirability from people who've maybe been forced during the pandemic to have to fend for themselves, so to speak, in terms of learning out new skills or dealing with problems or broken boilers and how to fix these things. So the desire for people to engage on a self-serve basis has never been more apparent. So again, this is a great opportunity for housing to take advantage of that from a commercial perspective, if it can be done right, to reduce costs. And then, finally for us, and a big part that we know of this sector is about community. And I think, we saw a massive increase in, clients, businesses, like organizations, but also their end users wanting to just, create communities in comfortable, engaging, more socially, digitally with those communities online. So, is this an opportunity for the housing associations to, craft a better engagement, a better community, and really invest in those social channels that aren't just for telling people that there's been a power outage or a problem because there's a leak somewhere. You know, there's real opportunity in engaging in these areas. In terms of sort of evolution or extinction, you know, we saw this stat a few months ago, which is that 90% of Fortune 500 firms that existed in 1955 no longer exist today, which is pretty terrifying to think that 90% of the biggest 500 organizations on the planet have effectively become extinct in less than one generation, you know, 70 years effectively. And that's really down to the fact that they probably rested on their laurels and didn't look to the future, didn't look to evolve, and probably took for granted the position they were in. Some of the ones we'll probably remember, the more notable ones, the Blockbusters of the world, Toys R Us, Kodak. You know, to pick out an example, I think Blockbuster, I read, got offered to buy Netflix in 2009 for $50 million, and they kind of laughed them out the boardroom. And Netflix is now worth, I think, 900 billion, and Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. You know, Toys R Us had the same instance with Amazon, where they were a middleman that then got removed. And Kodak didn't invest in digital cameras because they didn't want to disrupt the film business. So these are opportunities where I think if it can happen to the biggest businesses in the world, then it's absolutely critical that all of us in the room today are thinking about how we evolve and where our evolution goes next. Some of those businesses that have evolved, so the likes of Airbnb and Uber, both of these businesses have $100 billion market cap, or did at the time of putting this deck together. And neither of them own a single asset, not one asset between them. Airbnb doesn't own any properties and Uber doesn't own any vehicles. You know, these are businesses who've taken a concept that's been around for hundreds of years of renting a home in renting a room in a stranger's home, and giving a stranger a lift. You know, horse and carts. You know, people were doing this. So this is not a new concept, but somebody's evolved it and leveraged data and technology to invent a new business and a very lucrative business at that. And again, you know, to drive into this evolution phase, 5 out of 5 of the largest companies in the world today are technology based, built on innovation and data, and on an average less than 20 years old. So, you know, it's essential that we're embracing evolution and we're looking at how we move forwards to embrace this, regardless of the sector we're in. I think, you know, what do we see being key to evolution? We put it into 4 key areas. So data, technology, creativity, and strategy. We feel that these are the 4 kind of key ingredients that drive performance in any business. And I suppose not just performance today, but performance beyond today. And if you're not embracing all of these 4 key areas in your business right now, then that would concern us, and I think it should concern you too. So hopefully today we can give you some pointers in some areas of where we feel, you know, the housing association, the housing sector in particular, can embrace these 4 areas to drive your own evolution moving forward. And those obstacles, so finally for us, generally we kind of group those obstacles that might be, you know, a stumbling block to that evolution or a stumbling block to that growth into 4 key areas. So looking at transformation, you know, data analytics, modeling, first party data, measurement, how you make the decisions and drive the insight that's going to architect that future roadmap. Brand, so looking at, you know, your brand insight, your creative strategy, your brand messaging, your positioning, you know, what are you saying, what do you stand for, and how are you saying it is critical. Experience, you know, about website design, whether that's app development, you know, UX, just the general, ensuring that your tenants have the same digital experience as they might have physically in an area that you've invested and developed for years. Though every channel that somebody engages with you, it needs to be matched for quality. So the experience sectors is critical. And then finally, marketing. You know, again, we appreciate that it's not always about new tenant acquisition. It's generally about tenant retention and evolving in that respect. But still, you know, whether it's marketing or whether it's corporate comms or just how you're generally engaging with your target audience is a critical area. And all 4 of these areas form part of what the guys are going to speak about today. I suppose just finally on sort of entry, before I hand over to the speakers, you know, some of our previous missions that we've delivered and are continuing to deliver today. So Home Group, Johnny Johnson, St Modwin's Homes, people like Believe Housing, we're engaging across the sector, as Kate mentioned right now, on full-scale digital transformation projects, and then more complementary sectors as well, the likes of, Esh Group, who are a £200-300 million house development firm in the northeast, and Yorkshire, likes of Mobile Mini, Dove Building Materials. So lots of complementary sectors that all feed in to support the housing sector. And then probably more historically, looking at the utility sector. So I think, one of the big shifts that we see right now within your sector is the self-serve kind of movement. So effectively getting tenants to pay their rent, report repairs, answer questions online without the need to really have to engage with the call center operative or effectively even physically turning up at an office. I think, we saw the utility sector go through a very same movement, 5-6 years ago, and we supported them through that. And it's a very similar curve and a kind of digital curve that we're seeing housing go through now. I think, we appreciate key focuses for your organizations. Again, as I've mentioned before, aren't always around new tenant acquisition, but more about current tenant engagement, retention, brand reputation, and probably key above all is driving those internal efficiencies. I think one of the challenges we're seeing across the sector, and it's different for different organizations, is it's not always easy to get buy-in at a boardroom level for some of these digital initiatives that can drive real value. And I think that's an area we've helped a few of the more sort of digital naive organizations who are maybe just starting out on their journey by sharing case studies, creating business case kind of investment cases for the board to really see that tangible link between digital investment and how you can reduce calls into a center, reduce repair cancellation requests, and ultimately reduce tenant turnover rates. I suppose the final kind of key challenge we see in the sector is there's a lot of your organizations are built on legacy systems, some systems that were potentially put in place before the days of even APIs and things like this even haven't been invented. So again, we've had a lot of experience, and I'm sure Nick will touch on it, and a lot of the speakers will, about how we've supported organizations such as yourselves, working around those legacy systems, and bringing in new marketing concepts that might not have been something that you're currently investing in, introducing new channels with ways to engage with tenants. Because I think for us, ultimately, it's about customer satisfaction and customer experience being absolutely first class, which is key. And I think we're very passionate about digital being the #1 route to helping you enhance both of those things moving forward, kind of post-pandemic. So I'll hand over without further ado to Daniel Hogan, who's Chief Technology Officer at Mediaworks. Dan, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll request control now. So as Brett mentioned, I'm really going to take you through transformation, and really at the start, as Brett mentioned, we're now living in a world that has changed from a marketing and a digital perspective. And of course, that change has really been accelerated over the last 12 months, as we all know. But ultimately, the huge driver for this change has been the rapid pace in which technology and innovation has really shifted the way in which we as users have behaved and are changing in terms of our behavior as individuals. It comes from the smartphones that we have in our pockets that can record 4K videos, and they can send and receive data faster than our home connections can. And we've got smartwatches that can sit on our wrists and track our heart rate, and that can measure our daily activity. And really what that's done is it's put a spotlight on organizations. And as Brett said, different industries have evolved at different rates, but really what that's meant is people now expect all organizations, each and every organization, to have similar methods for communication and connectivity at all different levels, no matter where you operate in. And what this really means is that spotlight is shown on every organization that have a heavy focus on digital transformation. So every organization now needs to work to operate at a similar level, no matter what industry you're in. But the key bit is that this isn't easy. And there's a large number of global brands, and we mentioned some of them earlier. There's Facebook, there's Amazon, there's Tesla, that inherently have innovation and change at the heart of what they do. It's built into their DNA. However, there's organizations that can find it much harder to understand what needs to be transformed, and even just how do they get started in terms of digital transformation. I guess the starting point is, why is this? And largely it's because, as people who've been involved in sales and marketing, we've kind of grown up from this approach of having a traditional funnel. It's been very easy to have a linear journey where we start at the top of the funnel with awareness, consideration, through to intent and decision. But actually, this changing behavior from consumers has meant that it's no longer as linear and it's as easy to understand that journey from something like this. And actually we move to what we've got today, which in all honesty is way more messy and much more complicated. And actually, we jump around, we're bombarded with different brands, we're bombarded with different channels, we're bombarded with different messages. We've got a lot more promotions, and ultimately we've got so much choice when we come to making decisions, whether that's around things that we want to do, things that we want to choose from in terms of, whether it's products and services, and whether it's just the ways that we want to communicate with brands. So actually, as a brand that's looking to do transformation, it's very difficult to scope and measure what we want to transform through an organization. And where do we start when we've got so much complexity across that journey and we don't know how our customers or our tenants are engaging with us at all different stages across that journey? Do you need to improve your brand sentiment? Do you need to focus on improving customer experience with things like self-serve functionality? Or is there certain tenants that have real pain points around onboarding? And is that where we should focus investment? So really, we need to understand our customers in a much better way before we can focus on that. I think one thing that we do have to our advantage is, of course, that data is being collected in huge volumes. And as Brett mentioned earlier, that there's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data being collected on a daily basis. And to correct them, if each byte of data was a penny, they would cover the earth 5 times on a daily basis. So there's a huge wealth of data that we're getting as organizations on an ongoing basis. And just to reinforce that point, if we look at the marketing technology landscape, we can see the number of marketing platforms and vendors that exist. And actually looking back 9 years, there was only about 150 different vendors that existed. And fast forward to 2020, there's more than 8,000 different platforms that you can now invest in to get different data around your customer. So it shows you that data is huge and you've got access to so much data that you can use to understand, how your audience interact with you as an organization. And for that reason, actually, global CEOs see data as a valuable resource and therefore a key business priority moving forward. So actually, there's a fundamental reason for that. And really that fundamental reason is that data helps us make intelligent decisions. And what that can do is inform our decisions around digital and notably around transformation-led strategies. So really the key bit I would say is digital transformation is huge. It's gonna change what organizations need to do in terms of how they interact with users, with tenants. But looking back at that complicated and messy journey that they have, what we need to do is be able to interconnect all of the stages that they have with data, and that is what's going to allow us to understand what we need to transform. If we took that approach and we could join and stitch all of those stages and see how a customer flowed and engaged through each stage of their journey using data, that would be hugely valuable, especially when we could understand and aggregate that up and say, actually, where were their pain points? Where were the things that were the worst possible points along that stage that made them dislike that journey or made them not really like that brand per se? And if we could keep looking at that and have a constant cycle of insights, that would help us drive up what that strategy would look like in the long term. I guess the other thing that's an important element to note around data is that you'll have seen a lot of news around this more recently about changing privacy laws, concerns around data security, and fundamentally the sharing of data. And what this really means at a basic level is that you can no longer solely rely on third parties to just hand you data and say, this is who your audience are, this is what you should be doing, and this is what we think is most important to you and your audience. Actually, what you should be doing is using the data that you collect and the data that you get from your audience and using that. It's richer, it's more accurate, and only you have it, which gives you a competitive edge and actually gives you a much clearer understanding of what's important to your audience in the context of you and your organization. And, this is definitely coming. There's a lot of talk about, there's some people that are scaremongering that the data is a thing in data security. Might just be some people, but actually, at the heart of it, it's a two-sided argument that, some people are worried about data security, but actually the big businesses like Google are very much privacy focused as well. And they're looking and saying, actually, how do we do this? So this is a big piece that the big businesses are looking at as well. So what I would say is make sure you're collecting, combining and understanding your audience based on your own data. And this has never been so important. And for me, it's generally the first step in transforming your organization. So for us, and when we come into engage with a client from a digital transformation point of view, data and data collection is the first stage of understanding where a problem would be. It's pointless investing at a stage where actually it doesn't have any real value in terms of a client problem or a customer problem. You want to be looking at where does the key obstacles come. So you want to be using your data along with the latest technology, whether that's machine learning or probabilistic technologies, and take a data first approach to drive your digital transformation strategies that you've got coming up in the future. And as I said earlier, it isn't easy. Of course, there's going to be obstacles along the way. And there's obstacles within every organization in every sector. And that's where we try to assist clients, whether that's from understanding what data is valuable or helping them to stitch the data from a number of different data sources. As Brett mentioned before, you might have legacy systems that you need to tie into. And BCG did a great analysis on this in 2019 that analyzed several sectors to understand the level of access to data within these sectors. And we can see that, there's very different levels of access to data across the sectors. But even within specific sectors, there's different access in the same sector themselves. Within automotive, they have no access to little or indirect access. So it shows you, if you're in a business where you think, actually, we've got no access to our own data, this is potentially a starting point for understanding how do we get access to our data to more accurately understand what is a problem or a pain point for our audience or for our tenants. And we can use this to drive valuable data around what we need to transform. And from our experience within the housing sector, it actually is a case that you do have very limited access or no access at all. So let's use this as a starting point and understand how do we stitch this data together to give you a good, accurate understanding of the problems that you might face. I think the key bit is actually it's easier than you might think. So, what is first-party data? And really, it's all of the data that you collect as an organization, from the media channels that you have, from your website or your app, actually data that you have from your head office, offline data, through to your social media channels, through to email, even your contact center information, things like your web chat logs, and also stuff that happens in the community. And call outs and repairs, there's things that are going to be logged within the system. And you want to collect all of this, combine it and aggregate it. The difficult piece, of course, is aggregating it all together, because what you want to do is ultimately drive a single view of this. And this single person or single household view is where you get the value. So if you can combine some website data with some contact center data, then you can understand actually this person came on the website, couldn't find the information they needed, and they've gone on and then they've called us to answer their query. Actually, how can we solve that problem on the website? And we can stop them having to call in, and we can create a great system. The data really is at the heart of solving that problem and driving a transformation strategy that might lead into an experience-based project that you do. So the key bit here is really to use the data to inform and evolve what you're going to be doing. But the key bit is that, this data and this single view allows you to build out lots of models and lots of key bits of information that can drive a wealth of knowledge, things like audience profiling, through to sentiment analysis, through to, if you're selling homes, you can look at things like, profitability, propensity modeling. There's lots of key bits of information by just taking all of this data that you likely already have across different silos of the organization and pulling in a one data set and then profiling it across the business. So I think that the key bit here is that the data is always the start of any transformative project that you should be working on within the organization. So to show you this in practice, we worked on a transformative strategy with Yorkshire Water, and the key bit really was how do we make them digital first? You know, the key bit was that as an organization, they wanted to be digital first. The customers wanted them to be digital first, but also the regulators were pushing them to be a digital first organization as well. So the key bit here was, you know, we were looking at this from a high level point of view, and the strategy was, you know, looking at the data to understand the journey for customers and saying which are the high volume journeys that would lead to calls. They were a traditional business that got a lot of volume calls through their call center, but they weren't getting a lot of contacts or things filled via their website. They didn't have very many self-serve functionality things on their website. They weren't able to signpost people to things like web chat. And also they had the added risk that a lot of these were driving calls that were at risk of a potential fine from the regulator. It was up to a £10 million fine for these calls going over a threshold. So the key bit was how do we identify those that were the high risk calls where actually they were going to lead to a fine, but also were infuriating customers because there were things that they could resolve themselves through self-serve functionality, but were leading them having to sit in a queue and talk to someone at the end of the phone. So what we did is we work on a range of projects across this entire transformation project, and we're able to prioritize the key journeys through the use of data. And as a result of this, what we've seen was a great success in that we've seen, from an engagement point of view, 251% increase in digital contacts across the website year on year. So we've seen a huge uplift in the number of people actually using the website to drive digital contact. But more interestingly, in the first 3 months, we've seen that actually there was over 3,000 people using the online incidents reporting. So actually we're moving away people using the call center to report incidents, which actually weren't high value calls. And we wanted to keep the calls for where people were having, you know, high volume problems, whether it was a leak or an incident, which was actually really important and for them was a really emotive call. And actually from an adoption point of view, we had over 44,000 people using the callback functionality. This was where we could reduce the potential risk of the fine around that £10 million that was potentially something that Yorkshire Water may have to pay, and making sure that, you know, we were getting people to use the platforms with the correct signposting, and where they were seeing there weren't highly important calls, making them go towards callback functionality. So this notion of self-serve was really the key focus around their transformational approach to what they were looking to drive with their digital first approach. So really the data was what sat behind everything we did with Yorkshire Water, and we were using it to make sure that the process was driven by what the customers wanted rather than just something. So I guess the key bit really is that to remember that technology is always going to help from a transformative point of view, but data is key. So tying those two together really helps you understand what is going to drive your transformative strategies moving forward and help shape the future.
Cheers, Dan. Thank you. Nick, I suppose it'd be really interesting, I think, for everybody to just maybe understand for a couple of minutes what's Yorkshire Housing's kind of approach to that first party data and how you guys are using that at the moment to kind of drive that decision making?
I think we sort of used some external data sources to give an insight into our customers. So we've used stuff like Experian, etc. So, you know, the sort of the stuff you'd expect me to say, I suppose. And we do use some sort of standard tools to track things like website usage and interactions via social media as well. So it paints more of a picture. But I mean, it is interesting about third party versus first party, because most of our data sources are internal. And I think the housing sector generally has got, you know, data to die for. There are a number of sort of businesses outside our sector who would die for some of the data that we've got, but we're rubbish at making use of it. Partly because it's not always clean and accurate, but actually we just don't see the value that others see in it, and it really frustrates me, I suppose, because you know, I've been talking about the transition to self-serve since 2014. So in some ways, in some ways today's frustrating in that we're still talking about something which in any other sector, if you haven't already done this, you're dead in the water, you know, and I think that's partly because our sector whilst there are lots and lots of challenges and lots of opportunities, in some ways we are protected from what's going on in the wider world, a bit of a bubble. And I think what the pandemic is doing is, I think it's going to shatter that sort of protection that we've had, because I think a number of our customers who perhaps have previously contacted us via a variety of different means, normally in person, have not, or have chosen not to do that as a result of the pandemic. You know, why would you want to walk into an environment, a closed environment, where there's somebody sat opposite you and have a conversation when you know that there's a global pandemic going on, plus the fact that wasn't an option anyway. But I just think people have got used to engaging now in a different way. So I think it has accelerated. So I think today is, whilst it's frustrating in one way, is really timely, because I think if we think we're going to be able to return to delivering things how we did pre-pandemic, our customers are just going to say, there is absolutely no way we're accepting that. So I think today is really sort of pivotal for that. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to use data and our data sets to join some of the dots together and provide a more holistic view of our homes as well as our customers. So trying to link the two together in terms of what's happening, and starting to run some analytics around, well, actually, what does that mean? And you know, what's the likelihood of that happening again in another similar type of setting? Longer term, our strategy is really clear. We want the landlord service, if you look at it as its core base, it's based on failure. We wait for things to happen. We wait for our customers to tell us that something isn't working the way they want it to, whether that's a repair, which is the obvious one, but whether they want to move house, whether they want to, whether they've got they're struggling to pay their rent, whether they've got issues with their neighbours, whole raft of things that they contact us about. You know, if you speak to the vast majority of our customers, they say dealing with you is a hygiene factor. You know, you're a landlord. We just want you to do something when you say you're going to do it, and the rest of the time, we want you to get out of our lives. We've got busy lives. You're just a landlord. Get over yourselves. Now, for somebody like me who's been in the sector for a long time, it really hurts, because I'm like, well, I want to be more than that. But for the majority of our customers, they don't want any of that. They just want us out of the way, and they just want us to do stuff at a time and date of their choosing. And I think that's where our strategy is, around moving that service from being reactive to being preemptive, so that you don't have a service based on failure. You have a service that preempts things and events that might happen, and you deal with them, and you through an intervention before you hack off your customers. Basically, what other sector goes out, it waits for its customers to be hacked off before we then deal with it? You know, I've got vans going across the whole of Yorkshire with blue flashing lights. I'm rushing around trying to get to stuff because, you know, suddenly something's not worked. And actually we need to switch that around. It's more cost effective, but just importantly, as a customer experience, surely so much better than having to you know, try and contact your landlord when you're already feeling that things haven't worked out as you'd hoped. So as part of that strategy, there are three key elements: data and data analytics, coupled with smart home tech, because we still let and fit out our homes as we did in the 1950s, despite the fact there's a whole range of things that are now available that are cheap as chips on the market and are proven to work. And then thirdly is real-time customer insight. And I think those are the three, for us, those are the three magic ingredients. If you put those together, that will revolutionize the landlord service. And I think that's our strategic aim, to shift that landlord service from being reactive to being preemptive. And I think we're going to use data as part of that to improve forecasting, predict future events, but take action to prevent unwanted events. So, you know, boilers, great example, lazy example. Sorry, it's a Wednesday afternoon, so I'm going for the lazy example of a boiler. But boilers, there's only three components that fail in boilers. Yeah, and yeah, we don't track them. We don't have any sort of tracking on boilers, despite the fact it's commonly available. And boilers only break down out of hours. Boilers never, ever, ever break down during normal working hours. And I suppose for us, you know, what better thing than to, instead of somebody on a Friday night or on a weekend having to ring an out of hours service and, you know, beg for somebody to come and do, you know, a patch fix on something, which then you have to send somebody else out afterwards to do a proper repair. You know, once you know you're back into the working week. Surely it's better for us to have some sort of sensors or data analytics that says that component normally fails in that 3-month period. Therefore, you know, we make an appointment through the app with our customers and that says, we'd like to come and see, nothing to worry about, but we need to just, you know, come and do a little bit of work on your boiler to prevent it failing, because we don't want you to be without heating and hot water. Surely that's a better experience than waiting for things to go wrong. And the beauty from a business point of view is doing the same repair on a boiler is 5 times cheaper as a planned piece of work than an out of hours call. So, you know, it makes business sense, but also it makes, excuse me, customer experience sense. And I just think, you know, that it's not just repairs. You know, you can use data to identify patterns of customer behavior that suggest, for example, they may fall into arrears, and all the evidence shows that early interventions actually reap the best results in terms of arrears support. So I think it's about shifting our emphasis from being reactive to being preemptive, using data to help inform some of that decision making. But data on its own won't do that. There are some other elements that we need to feed into that. So sorry, Dan, and I love data, and I keep telling my 3 kids, you know, if you're going to do something, go through data analytics, you'll make shed loads of money, you know, much more than doing anything else, because they're so rare, sort of data analysts. But I think for me, I think we've got to put that into context of a wider service offer. And I think we've just got so much that we could make better use of. And I suppose that's the opportunity that lies there. Sorry, Brett, really, you've got me on one of my passions, so sorry about that. I'll try and make answers a bit shorter.
No, Nick, there was a lot of great stuff there. In fact, I got up to the end of the first page and I stopped writing key points. You nailed everything. I think there's some fantastic points you made there about the preemptive approach to life. And I think, you know, we found ourselves sat in Yorkshire Water call centres with headsets trying to figure out why people were phoning in, you know, what the negative approach was, and then how we could create a journey online for that. So it's all of the stuff you covered there. And we've been chatting to a couple of housing associations about, can we start creating Alexa skills to pay your bill? So you can just be sat on the sofa, you can ask Alexa to pay your bill. You know, all of this stuff is there to be had. And the nudge theory you mentioned about, you know, identifying patterns of behavior and how you can support tenants. I think all of that stuff's great stuff, and it's definitely the way that the world needs to go. Great. Well, Jill, I think you're up next. I don't know if I have control or you have control.
Yep.
Yeah. So I will hand over to you, Jill.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We've obviously talked a lot there about data and technology, and I'm going to now talk you through the importance of brand in driving performance. I thought just before we get into the detail, I'll just start with a little bit of a scene setter, and probably one that's quite relevant to the wonderful year in which we've all just found ourselves. So this chart on the right that you can see here, it just shows really during the last financial crisis what happened to the brands that invested in or continued to invest in their brand versus those that didn't. And quite simply, you can see that those that invested recovered a lot more quickly, but also at a much kind of faster rate as they came out of that crisis. So it was just really a quick intro to really say there's probably not a big surprise there. You know, a lot of the world's biggest companies have the, you know, fantastic brands. And, you know, I was just thinking you don't even get a taxi anymore, you get an Uber. It's the big brands that are really imprinted in your mind. You know, they've become a sort of everyday part of your language that you're using. So I again, just thinking about how do brands work and, you know, how do we go about driving performance? There is so many different kind of schools of thoughts out there. I mean, we read quite a lot that Byron Sharp, I don't know if you've ever read a book called How Brands Grow, but he keeps it quite simple. He talks about the sort of 2 vital ingredients to growth. You have physical availability and you have mental availability. I think physical availability is probably, you know, the more straightforward of the 2. This is, you know, just make sure that if it's a product, it's really easy to buy. If it's a service, make sure it's really easy to access. And that's probably where quite a lot of businesses, organisations, they focus a lot of their efforts in and around sort of physical availability, and that's important. But I think it's just making sure that we don't then miss out on the second part, which is all about mental availability. And really that's about building these really distinctive memories. And Byron talks a lot about, you know, repetitively using the same brand assets, repetitively using brand advertising. And that's the way that you go about building emotional connections with the audiences that you're talking to. And that's what Apple does, that's what Uber does, it's what a lot of these kind of big brands out there do. So there's, you know, there's a lot we can take away from that. And that's really what we do. We try to keep it simple. We try to look at, well, what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses in and around mental availability? And you know, how can we go about seeking opportunities to build these more powerful connections? Just on this next slide, it's probably the next question we often get asked is, well, what about price? I mean, you know, if you have a weak brand, can you go about, you know, charging lower prices? Will that beat off the competition? I think we would probably say no, not always. There's this chart here. This is one that we've pulled off Google's Trends, which really does prove it's not always about price. You know, you've got the searches containing the word cheap here. They're actually on a downwards trend, whereas it's the other ones that have got best in front of them that you can see is growing. So I think, yeah, it is a simple chart, but it really just tells us that, you know, that people are out there kind of seeking a feeling. You know, they're putting best in front of product, best in front of service. It's more than just price and the kind of rational messaging. So that was a bit of a theory really, just to kind of tee up what we're talking about. But then I think practically then, how do we go about building a brand strategy? So first and foremost, we will always start with insight. You know, we always start by looking, well, who are the audience and what can we understand about how they're behaving? Some of that might be desk-based. There is a bunch of amazing tools out there. We subscribe to YouGov, which is a really big panel tool, and that allows us to get really granular. You know, we can find out where people are, we can find out what they're interested in, we can find out who or what is actually influencing their behaviours. So that's always a starting point for us. But it is more than channel choice. So I think, you know, the actual formats, so how we actually go about communicating with our audience, that can also change, and that can change from channel to channel. It can change from audience to audience. We just pulled off this little chart here just to just really demonstrate this difference between audiences. So you've got an example here of Gen Z, and you know, they take anything between sort of 0 to 2 seconds to kind of process content, whereas everybody else, people like us, me, that, you know, it just takes slightly longer. So I think, as well as, you know, your audience, the kind of channels that you're in, we've got to also think about the type of content that we're creating, the type of formats that we're creating. And, you know, that could be a short video if you're in the world of Gen Z, it could be a longer article. So yeah, there's a lot more that needs considering around sort of audience behavior and the content that they're consuming. So that's a bit of a whistle stop around sort of insight and strategy. And I think once we've got a really good understanding of, you know, the brand, how it's doing currently, you know, we might look at competitors, we've got a good understanding of our audience behaviours, we've looked at channels, we've looked at formats, and then we bring all of this together into what we would call our connected ecosystem. And that's effectively the kind of plan to build your brand. And for us, this is a really critical part of a brand strategy. I think, you know, I often sit in meetings and say that, you know, brand is more than just a logo. For us, it's more about channel choices. It's about media consumption. It's about every single touch point, you know, that your audience come across. And you don't want to go about investing a heap of money in a wonderful new brand proposition and a visual brand identity for then, you know, one of your audience to get onto your website or your app, for example, and that be a really clunky experience. A lot of those touch points can say a lot about your brand and make people feel something. You don't want that to be a bad experience. So you've got to have a kind of a good experience, a good seamless experience across the entire ecosystem. Okay, so then we kind of ask the question, well, what does the creative need to do? And again, I think just to sort of set the scene that we just pulled this chart off, it's from IPA, this one, and just really to make the point that it's the really creative, emotional campaigns that build profit, way more than the kind of straight up rational campaigns that are out there. So for us, this really is, we're ultimately talking about good creative. So you might have a really rock solid ecosystem channel plan in place, but it can fall down, you know, as we kind of get into that creative development process. Love a formula. So this, again, lots of different sort of schools of thought out there, but this is the one that we follow as we sort of go through setting creative foundations in and around brands. So we have A. So for us, this is abnormal. It's, you know, is there something unusual or outstanding in the creative, something that will really catch people's attention? We've got B, and that's the benefit. And are we communicating the benefit really clearly? You know, is the proposition that we have, is that really single-minded? And then culture, that's about cultural sort of relevance. Is there something in there that will really resonate with the target audience that we're going to, or feel that we're kind of talking directly to them, that we kind of get them, we get their world? What's the V? Just a wonderful cartoon here. So V is our vampires. So I think it's once you've got all those things in place, it can all fall down with a vampire. And this is anything that can jar within the creative. So we've probably all seen this, you know, with some of maybe the weaker sort of brands out there, but it could be bad music, it could be bad acting, it could be a really cheesy, you know, stock photo in an ad, for example. So I think just not forgetting that having that really experienced production team to kind of take on the creative vision, the kind of creative development is also critical. Enough about vampires. Okay. So then how do we go about planning campaigns? I think firstly, we'll take all of that audience insight, and then it's just making sure that we choose the most effective channels. But then I think we've also got to recognise that when we talk about brand, we're talking about a longer term investment. You can achieve a certain amount by these kind of shorter term rational messages. If we go out there with an ad about cheap homes to rent, we probably will see some kind of uplift. But it's this kind of longer term investment in brand advertising, that sort of repetitive messaging, that will build these emotional connections. And this chart here, you can see that starts to build in the longer term a far bigger increase in sales, but also a reduction in things like price sensitivity. So I think probably just to make the point that this is about balance, it's ensuring that we factor in brand advertising as well as sales sort of driving activity into the plans that we do, and both are vital. But it's really the brand, that's the part that's going to make you distinctive versus competitors, and ensure that, when we're going out there with comms, that we don't fall down when we're putting all of that focus on rational messaging. And then I suppose like our Yorkshire Water example, we just pop this one in here. So this is a client that we work with at the minute, United Utilities. So another water company, and they cover the whole of the Northwest. But I thought it was just a sort of similar situation that we, with water companies to begin with, you can't choose your water company. So, the likes of Ofwat, they've introduced CMEX, which is their whole scoring around kind of customer experience. So they're basically measuring the service levels of, all of the water companies out there. So I think as a result of that, and them getting incentivized to provide these brilliant services, we're seeing a lot of water companies now focusing their efforts on excellent customer experiences, and kind of back to that point about the ecosystem, making sure that every single touch point supports that great customer experience. So, we produce lots of sort of hardworking campaigns. We focus a lot on the initiatives that they do. So things like water meters and water efficiency, but we also do a lot around the UU brand and the brand purpose and all these wonderful things that they're doing in and about the communities that they're servicing. But this was just one example really about, self-serving and trying to take people away from call centres, but brand playing quite a big role in that and making sure that, you know, we came across as really helpful and it was a good experience, but keeping things simple and just generally making the lives of, you know, the customers that we're serving easier. So this was just a simple little short promo video that we created really to get people to kind of download the app. And, you know, we saw great success off the back of that. We reached a lot of people in terms of social impressions, but also there was a lot of people that then went on to download the app in that first month and, you know, again, take people away from the sort of call centres that they usually default to. So I think just to summarise, really, I would just say that brand strength, you know, that is the key to driving performance. We know that that's what a lot of the big players do, a lot of the disruptors out there, has given them the advantage over a lot of their competitors, and just making sure that, you know, we get this balance right. It is about driving people to convert, but also, you know, making sure that we do focus on brand and these bigger emotional connections.
Thanks, Jill. It's really good. I think a lot of useful tips, and I think just probably more focus for a lot of attendees today where brand might not be that at the forefront of their thinking. I know, Nick, you know, you guys in particular have just, or more recently, been through a big rebrand. I suppose it would be really interesting to understand kind of what drove that investment, because these things are sizable investments of time and energy and resource, generally at a very senior level. And I suppose, you know, how has that affected those regular brand perception surveys you guys are running, and just generally your engagement with tenants post that event?
Yeah, I think we have recently sort of been through a sort of brand, and I think interestingly, before we did that, we talked about our tone of voice. So, you know, we're Yorkshire Housing, you know, we tell it how it is. We're pretty straight talking. We use words like we're well chuffed and, you know, all those sorts of things, but we didn't in any of our sort of communications and correspondence. And in fact, it was actively discouraged. So what we actually did was we went back to what is it we actually want? What do we want our customers and for people who might be interested in, say, coming to work with us? You know, what do we want them to think of us? And that's why we got back to what's our brand personality. So, you know, that was around being bold, about being straight talking, about being friendly, being smart, and also proud, and proud to be, you know, based in Yorkshire and of what we do. And I think it was then about how do you bring that to life in terms of not only in how you speak, but because that builds trust that Jill was talking about. But I think also, you know, if a customer asks us a question, we just want to be simple and clear in our answers. We're all human, and there's nothing worse, is there, than when you get some gobbledygook sort of response and sort of, I know, Jill, you talked about, you know, bad music and bad actors, but I'd add to that list, you know, and you just get a load of waffle words that mean nothing. You just say, for goodness sake, just tell me how it is. So I suppose that was the sort of the pretext to it. And I think we learned from some others as well. So, you know, Jill had some of my favourite brands up there. But I'd add to that First Direct. You know, how can you get excited about your bank? You know, the bank that makes money out of your money. How can you get excited and feel a love for somebody who does that? But I do. You know, I've banked with First Direct for 20 plus years, and every interaction with them is like this, the people there have been sprinkled with magic fairy dust, you know, or cloned, something like that. One of those two anyway. But interestingly, the brand reflects how people are when I have those interactions with them. And you know, so I suppose for us, it was about, we don't just want a shiny new logo. We want, you know, the trust to be gained by our actions and the experience that our customers have with us, and whether that's by phone, in person, or digital channels. And I think, you know, every one of those interactions is absolutely a golden opportunity, because that changes our customers' perception. And, you know, our customers, their perception of Yorkshire Housing isn't influenced by me or any of this. It's by the people that they're dealing with day in, day out, who, and our experience was not consistent. And I suppose that's what we went back to first. So sorry, Brett, I will answer your question in a minute, but I think there's a bit before it where we were trying to sort out actually what is it we're trying to be and what is it we're trying to do. And so we got back to that thing about being consistent, and no matter why customers were actually interacting with us, it was about actually ensuring we were consistent, and that in itself is what builds trust. So then getting to answering your question, Brett, sorry. We launched our new brand, first of all, internally, before we went external. And we wanted to do that to give colleagues time to get to know the new brand, what it means, and to feel comfortable and relaxed in talking and communicating in a different way from perhaps what had been drilled into them from a number of years working in the housing sector. And it's something we're still building on. We're still not there. You know, we're still doing more work on this in the coming months. And we're even doing some sessions with people on feeling comfortable, you know, using our tone of voice. And interestingly, you know, we've just appointed a couple of new senior staff. And, you know, the people team sent me the letter that they'd done in our tone of voice. But then, you know, you take that to another level, you know, because I was saying I'm really pleased to be welcoming you to the business. It was like, well, actually, I'm well chuffed. That's what I'd say. So my letters, yeah, my notes said, I'm really chuffed that we're going to be working together. Can't wait. And it's that sort of stuff. That's what people want. They don't want all the sort of formalities. And I think it's really hard to sort of measure that. But I think since we've launched our new brand, we've definitely seen more positive sort of interactions with our customers. I think there's that feeling of being more honest and just more open and clear about things. And also interested with some of the feedback I've had from, you know, people like MPs who say it's a breath of fresh air to actually have something, a response back that's clear. In terms of brand perception surveys, just to answer the other part of your question, we don't actually do those as it stands. But actually, COVID has provided an opportunity for us, for customer and colleagues, to connect on a more personal level. So we've tried to reach out to all of our customers and keep them updated on any changes to services through a variety of different means. We've used social media, we've used digital channels, but we even went old school, much as it absolutely killed somebody like me who's paperless. I've been paperless for 19 years, but even I had to admit that there was some real value sometimes in going a bit old school. And we actually sent a letter to some of our customers who we knew might be struggling to engage digitally. And the feedback was phenomenal around, you know, and it was in our tone of voice. It was very different way of doing things. And I suppose it's that thing about mixing it up and keeping it fresh and adapting to quite a rapidly changing environment. I think certainly in terms of, you know, the world of comms and marketing, it's just moving at such a pace that it's hard to sort of keep track sometimes of that. But I think our new brand and our new tone of voice are changing the way that, most importantly, we interact with our customers. And I think, again, I'd just go back to the purpose of this was to build trust and shape our customers' experience of us through how we communicate. And I think that was first and foremost, it wasn't about a logo. It was about that whole brand personality and why it's so important for what we do and who our customers are and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jill, I mean, that's really, really valuable, Nick. Jill, we've had quite a bit of experience actually with First Direct as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of pulled that. And I'm glad you talked a lot about tone of voice and actually then that behaviour of reaching it through into call centres, you know, and things like that. Because you're right, First Direct, I mean, we've worked with them for years and it's almost it's not their downfall, like they're amazing, but like you say, you look forward to calling the call centre because you know the type of person that's going to be at the other end of the phone. And actually the project we're looking at the moment is how do we encourage, you know, more self-serve and get people away from doing those basic transactions, you know, and actually bring that kind of tone, the language, the helpfulness into the app and into the sort of web experience and get people away from the call centres, because it's just crazy the number of people that are calling them to speak to Sandra at the other end of the phone who they love, because you're right, it's a great experience when you call First Direct. So yeah, but I think it's almost how do you bring your brand, your values, your tone, your language, all of that into this online experience, and you know, because it's got to reflect in both worlds, on and off.
I think one of the other things you said as well, Nick, around, it's not about switching other channels off, it's about opening new channels up. And I think we had a lot of hesitancy in those early days, a few years back with the utility businesses, and again with a few housing clients more recently who have been worried about alienating some of the customers who still enjoy using those traditional channels. And I think digital transformation is not about, making those traditional channels worse or making them more difficult to engage through. It's about bringing in new channels and matching the quality of those traditional channels, which I think is absolutely key. So,
and I think I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think the whole thing about the shift to self-serve, you've got to make the self-serve offer better than the existing offer, not dilute the existing offer or not restrict access to the existing offer. But you've got to make the self-serve offer and a whole range of other services that you want people to transition across to so good that actually you choose to do that. And it's interesting, Jill, with the First Direct sort of example, I use the app almost on a daily basis, and it's great, it's easy, it's clean, it works. But I must admit, there are times when, I just smiled when you said it. What other bank can say? There are times when I, of all people, would choose not to use the digital route because actually I enjoy the in-person process so much with that.
And we use that all the time, but it's
it's a bit of a light bulb moment for me as a long-standing First Direct customer, and I feel it's like a guilty pleasure. I feel like I've confessed something that nobody knows really. So, but yeah, I mean, what a great brand they've got, and to be a bank that literally, robs you of your money, to actually, they make money out of your money. That's their job. But for you to love it, it's just bizarre, isn't it? It's a weird feeling.
And you're right about choice. There's no vision to, it's not about losing the call centres altogether, but just keeping them there for the more complex things that genuinely require one-to-one discussions and a bit more hands-on support. Whereas making basic payments, transactions, that's like 60% of their calls can be done with a very two-step process within the app. So yeah, it's a big mission for them over the next year.
And a great example of an organisation that's really adapted to the future of work, because all their staff are now based at home.
Yes.
And why would you then want to bring back people into the human equivalent of a battery chicken farm, to all sit there just answering phones? It's just where's the value in that?
Totally true.
No, absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Jill, and thanks again, Nick. And I think without further ado, we'll move on to Andy Blenkinsop. Andy's our creative director who oversees all of our experienced teams in terms of design and build of our websites, our apps, etc., and has been heavily involved in a couple of major projects, which I think he'll no doubt touch on now during his talk. So over to you, Andy.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I think in all the years I've done this, I've never had a better tee-up than that conversation that you guys have just had, which leads us kind of very nice into this section here where, it is very much around that digital experience and how can we build a channel of choice. And that's what we want to build here. We want to use digital, but make it the chosen channel for all of the right reasons. And how can we, essentially, I love this little slogan of designing and build a better future for our customers using digital. So as we've kind of alluded to previously, the demand for digital experiences isn't necessarily new. Right? It's always kind of been there. In 2014, the European Parliament pledged to support that demand. They recognise that digital is transforming the world at an unprecedented speed. But it was really kind of changing the way that people connect, what that businesses engage with kind of customers or tenants or communities. So the digital has always been there. But as kind of Nick and everybody's alluded to, it was just fast-tracked during the pandemic. And what we mean by that, it was fast-tracked, and I've kind of drawn 3 examples here. On the left, the first hand, you've got some businesses needed it to survive. So, for example, in the Granger market up here in Newcastle, you had local independents that didn't have a digital channel. They had no way to trade. But actually, through a kind of community and kind of embracing digital together, they managed to exist through that very kind of testing period and will manage to still trade through digital channels. Probably something that, let's be honest, the Granger market never really thought about doing, but it became a kind of their only route to survival, essentially through a very difficult time. Zoom was a platform, a product that you would only ever really see in the boardroom. I think, you know, we were using it to communicate in the corporate world, but it made its way into the front room of just about every kind of family. You were doing quizzes on a Friday night. It was the only way you could engage with grandparents down the country with the children. So actually what Zoom did is it kind of put digital in the hands of an audience, a demographic that we maybe didn't consider as much as we did, or we didn't think we would have to offer digital channels to. So that's kind of really helped fast track that. And then I always remember this one, it was during the very early stage of the pandemic. Due to just sheer volume, digital became the only way you could kind of engage with certain businesses. It was just based on sheer demand, they were actually channeling people to digital services with no other choice. So actually there was a little bit of people were being forced to use digital in other parts of their life that has kind of almost shocked them into doing it. But most importantly, all of the studies since the initial pandemic have shown that people intend on continuing to use digital channels as part of their everyday life. You know, people are feeling more and more confident to shop online, to try and have their groceries delivered, to engage with banks, as we've just touched on First Direct, on a daily basis. So not only has it changed the way we behave in this kind of, you know, very awful time, but it's changed the way that we'll engage forever. So it's fast tracked, as Nick said. It's put, you know, strategies that were in place in 2014 are just being really driven and accelerated through kind of the current pandemic. So how do we embrace change? And it gets back to the kind of the fundamentals that Brett had touched on early on. And it's, you know, we need to have a strategic roadmap that leverages the power of data. That Dan's touched on creativity. Jill spoke about being creative in your brand and using it to communicate on these digital channels in a way that is personal, that does engage, and that actually, you know, delights customers, that people want to come back to continue to use. And then finally, we use the latest technologies to ensure that the experience we provide is customer centric, but it's frictionless. You know, it's as easy as picking up the phone, hearing 3 rings and having the most pleasant person on the phone solve your problem in a way the brand does. So, you know, the 4 fundamentals in terms of how we embrace this change is critical. So just to kind of touch on data, because, you know, Nick made a very good point of, you know, there is a lot of access to data out there, and as people are embracing more and more channels, we're exposed to more and more data points that can kind of help shape the experiences that we put together. But you've got to kind of almost know what to do with it, and it's how do you use that data to create an experience that is kind of good enough and that is of the quality that customers expect. So, you know, we can use third-party data to look at customer profiles. You can use Experian, YouGov, GWI, you know, export lists from Facebook to get a kind of understanding of the demographic of your tenants, so, or potential customers. So third-party data points are a great way to start to kind of get a deeper understanding of customers. Search data. So you're looking at the way that people are actually using search and looking for the kind of questions that they're asking on a daily basis through Google is a very good way to understand what journeys can be transitioned online. Because if you know the demand is there, then as a brand, it's just your job to be visible and make sure that you're actually ranking and that you're accessible at the times when customers are trying to overcome pain points. Your own analytics, Dan had touched on it, you know, the beginning of first party data, looking at how current platforms are actually serving tenants is a way that you can see what's working and what's not. And it's often a great place to start improving existing experiences, to learn about what tenants are currently using your website for, and actually putting them at the forefront, signposting correctly, making sure that people can see them. And then finally, this idea of personalization, that probably touches to, I suppose, again, to what Nick was touching of how can we be proactive in our messaging, and actually providing personalized experience through your first party data is actually when you can really deliver, in my opinion, that kind of step change in customer service online. And that's about being proactive and using big data to understand, you know, what do people want next? How can we look at their previous page path through a website? How can we look at the kind of their behavior as a tenant, you know, whether they've visited a certain part of the website 3, 4, 5 times, where, as you say, over a period of time, you can collect enough data to identify a trend and see what's probably the next outcome of their action, or how can we get there in front of a problem to prevent a problem, or as Nick had said, deal with a problem in a more efficient, cost-effective way for the business in terms of being planned as opposed to reactive. So, you know, being personal on digital experiences, I feel is a huge thing from a brand as well. As Jill said, this idea of kind of the value in your brand can be delivered through personalized experience, because we don't want to be faceless. We don't want to continue to send people to an experience that doesn't use the right tone of voice, which feels personal, which feels understanding. And I think the language you use when you're kind of creating these experiences is critical. You'll know when somebody wants to be empathetic. You know where some people actually just want to get something done. And as Nick had said, get out of my way. I just want to solve a problem. I just want to pay my bill. So so different experiences require a different approach, but personalizing those will get you the best results. The technology that we use is absolutely critical in terms of providing fantastic digital experiences, and I've kind of tried to break this down into 3 areas. The first thing is just the performance. So actually, by using the best technology and providing a best-in-class UX, that's going to get you the kind of results that you want from all of your existing marketing efforts, let's say. So if you provide a fantastic customer experience, your conversion rate is going to increase significantly. So all of your efforts from a paid campaign, if you're going to acquire customers, or from an SEO campaign, if you're trying to increase visibility around key journeys, that's going to be driven by the performance and of your website, of your digital kind of channel. So that's going to help from an audience perspective. But we've done a lot of kind of work recently looking at Core Web Vitals, which again is an update coming out from Google. So what Core Web Vitals does is it takes experience and it's essentially making it a key ranking factor. So if your experience for customers isn't as Google would expect in terms of providing technical excellence, then it's actually going to prevent your ranking. It's going to stop you from ranking. It's going to kind of be that differentiator between you and a competitor. So the performance of your website is actually, it's critical, and the technology you choose to do that is essential. The second area I wanted to cover off was accessibility. By opening up these digital channels, you can start to, I suppose, improve accessibility. And not only are you making these journeys visible, and you can get them through your social, you can get them through your, just an organic search, but it's actually things like overcoming language barriers or impairments. There's tools like Recite Me, which will unlock a whole host of functionality in terms of, translating content, looking at kind of, I suppose, visual impairments. So we can look at kind of color, black and white, enlarging text to make it easier for people to consume. So actually, through digital channels, you can provide a better, more accessible experience, and it can really play a huge part in that. And then finally, platforms. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to jump on a question that came in from Rob in terms of how important is the Internet of Things when it comes to kind of using this data and then actually actioning it. And I think, people are using, or I suppose, connecting to the internet and engaging with brands through more platforms than they ever have, whether it's a mobile telephone, a desktop, a laptop, and wearable tech. Voice is becoming more and more important. Alexa skills, Brett touched on. So actually, as kind of, consumers go out and they use these different platforms, it opens up so much opportunity to use these to collect data, but to provide, an experience on a channel that's definitely right for the audience that you're trying to target. I know that Alexa idea, this idea of trying to open up content that we have on a website through an Alexa skill would just be so much easier in order to try and problem solve, or even, as you say, Brett, carry out high transactions, and pay bill straight through Alexa just with voice. That really aids that accessibility thing as well. So the Internet of Things and connected devices is huge in terms of the future of the way that we engage. Jill kind of touched a little bit on creativity, and I think earlier on when Brett did the introduction, you stated, we've got 3 seconds to grab the attention of future customers. So creativity is absolutely critical. And a few weeks ago, I was asked about, so how do you grab someone's attention within 3 seconds? How do you get around that? And I think there was 2 aspects when we thought about it. I think the first thing is relevance. So if we invest all of our time and data to making sure that we've built an experience that's going to be relevant to a customer, and we actually optimize it to make sure that we are visible at the point when a customer is searching, then we're going to have someone's attention. But it's also kind of really apparent that these spaces that we operate are more competitive than they've ever been. So our content needs to be engaging, it needs to be creative, It needs to be in the right format to engage with a particular audience. As a younger demographic is preferring to consume it through video, whereas an older demographic still likes written word. And actually, as Nick alluded to, some people might want offline. We might have to start introducing letters and print. And if that's the way that kind of audience wants to engage with us, then that's the way that we need to do it. But the chart on the right here says as well, as we think about kind of customers of the future, and baby boomers, 34%, they want to be more creative, but that just grows through Gen X and then right into millennials. So we have a generation of creatives coming through, who will respond well to the way that we communicate as a brand, where the video we're creating, the social ads we're putting out there, the comms that the way that we speak, the tone of voice. So all of that creativity is going to help engage and make sure that we stand out, and that we're chosen as a brand, as somebody that a customer wants to do business with, or a tenant feels positively about. And then the final thing, I suppose, once we went through all of that, is we need to have a strategic approach to delivering this, because we know that the future is, the pace at which we've embraced digital just means that change comes quicker. So we have a long-term focus. We know that we want to engage with individuals through Alexa skills, but there's going to be some assumptions that we have to make. We might have to assume that every household has a certain amount of tech in order to work out how we're going to deliver it. We might assume that we're going to put Alexa skills into the houses of all of our tenants, and then we can develop digital experiences around that. But there's always going to be kind of obstacles to that. Legacy data. Legacy data might be a huge kind of challenge that you need to overcome, that mightn't really come to life until 3 or 4 years time. So I think what we kind of always profess is to have a long-term focus, right? Make assumptions as to what your customer experience and what excellence looks like in say 2025, 2030, but break those down into short-term projects, because you don't want to put off making change and keeping up with competitors because you can't quite get excellence tomorrow. We need to just be delivering digital transformation in short spurts to make sure that our experiences are better tomorrow than they are today. And we can do this in small steps, but they have to be aligned to the long-term vision. We need to know where we're trying to get to in 5-10 years, but breaking that down into shorter term projects across 6 months, monthly kind of outputs is a great way to ensure that we don't get kind of caught up and I don't want to say deliver nothing, but you don't actually deliver any of that change because the long-term vision is just too big. So I've been kind of, I suppose, involved in a few of these projects now, and the one that I wanted to kind of touch on was Home Group, where we started this project a year and a half ago, I think it was, where we were looking at kind of designing and building a new website that would support this channel shift strategy. So how we were going to build a new website that better served tenants, but also kind of, I suppose, offered some internal efficiencies. So how could we reduce call center demand? What we didn't want to do here is build another channel for a customer to contact the organization. It was how can we identify kind of gaps in content that will allow customers to self-serve? How can they go out and solve problems on their own? How can we look at high volume journeys that just don't feature online? So kind of went through 3 phases. First thing was audience insight. So, we used traditional methods like focus groups. We went out and kind of spoke to existing tenants, future tenants, people who were looking to buy a house for the first time. And we gained as much insight as we could from those guys. But then we expanded that out. We used digital channels to collate as many data points as possible. We created content gap analysis. We optimized the experience and essentially built a new website that put customers at the forefront, and that was where we started. Everything that we were trying to do was driving a better customer experience, and that it was about organizations, but tenants were first and foremost. And off the back of it, we've seen some huge success. We've seen 480% increase with the repair section of the site compared to the previous year. And that wasn't just putting a form out there. We were building diagnostic tools so we could help unwanted contacts, as well as fast track the wanted contacts. Not everything is a digital channel, as Dan mentioned before. Some things we do need to pick the phone up. If we're talking about a gas leak or something, then actually digital isn't the channel choice there. It's pick up the phone immediately. If we had individuals that were maybe struggling to pay a bill and we wanted to just talk to that person, so we were encouraging telephone contacts where we wanted to free up agent time to have the conversations that meant something to customers and that needed that time. But it allowed us to reroute the high volume transactional stuff through digital channels. So we've seen a huge success around the repair section of that. 33% of customers moved from contact center to digital channels in the first year, which is brilliant, because that adoption is so often one of the harder parts of this. You can create the best digital experience in the world, but we've got to drive customers to it and get them to embrace this change. And then I suppose that arguably the most impressive stat is, we did put some kind of real-time feedback. We wanted people to tell us about this experience, and 82% of the feedback that we got was positive. And that meant that not only did we done a good job by home group, but we've done a good job by our tenants. And that positive kind of feedback is I suppose, the number we take away and we're most proud about, by kind of serving our tenants better and creating a channel of choice, essentially. So in summary, customer behaviors are changing. And, I spoke there about, customer behavior changing in as much as, 18 months, but it has been, we've went through a pandemic, and it has really changed the way that customers are dealing with brands and businesses. But that's going to continue to evolve, as other sectors kind of lead in the forefront and they start engaging on different channels, using different tech. We need to keep up. We need to offer that customer service in our sector at a standard that everybody else is, let's say. So actually, digital experiences are a necessary ingredient to keep pace with competitors, drive value from customers, attract and retain to fuel your future growth.
Thanks, Andy. That was really, really good, really useful. And I think, again, a lot of really interesting insight in a great case study there, the work that we did with Home Group. Nick, I suppose, just coming across to yourself, sort of, are there any areas that Yorkshire Housing are currently, maybe not happy with their experience, or not so much not happy, but looking to invest in their experience, and what's kind of driving those conversations for you guys at the minute?
I think some of it goes back to what Andy said around being clear on the sort of strategic purpose, which sounds a bit grand, doesn't it? So using Yorkshire Housing's tone of voice, what are you trying to do, lad? What are you trying to achieve from it? So I suppose for me and for our organisation, the key benefit of self-serve, twofold really. One, again, picking up on some of the stats that Andy had there, it's meeting a shift in customer expectations. Customers now see this as an absolute basic, and if they can self-serve everywhere else in terms of their lives, why not with their landlord? We're almost a bit of an outlier. But I suppose most importantly of all, and our key strategic driver behind the whole sort of digital shift is it frees up resources. It frees up people and time to provide more intensive support for those people who really need it, for those customers who really need that intensive support, who previously we probably have given a little bit of that too, but not had the time to be able to do that. And also it goes back to the fact that, a number of our customers just see us as a hygiene factor. It's just transactional stuff, and they want it doing as quickly and as easily as possible. And so I think the other strategic sort of driver is having a digital interface that directly links to our operating system, so that for the customer, it's a seamless journey. They go live into our system, and what comes out the other end is actually what will actually happen, rather than it, for example, generating a message or an email to some colleague in the business who then rings them back. That's not a digital experience. That's just really, really clunky. And I think just picking up on Andy's point about only having 3 seconds as well. I'm surprised it's that long. Is the first thing. I shut off well before 3 seconds, so I think I must be a bit of an outlier. But I had a bit of I read a book which is quite rare for me. I only do it once a year on holiday. It was called Information is Beautiful, and it was a gift that was given to me by a family relative who knew that I had a short attention span. And it was just a book full of infographics. And I remember it was a huge moment for me where I just went, you know what, this is a fantastic way of delivering quite complex information in a really sort of digestible format. And so it just sort of really sort of accelerated my sort of love and passion and rollout of using infographics as a way of getting the message across. But I suppose in terms of where things still aren't right, customer feedback, we've got some good practices in place for that, but whether that's through surveys or through things like complaints, and they do lead to changes and improvements, but it could be better. That still doesn't feel particularly sophisticated. We do quite a lot internally around lessons learned and reviewing processes, particularly where things haven't worked, but we're less good at celebrating where things have worked well, and I think that's not dissimilar for most organisations. We are continually improving some of our internal digital processes, and we've got quite an ambitious plan to both replace and consolidate all of our operating systems. We're shifting to Dynamics, which is no mean feat, because that will basically remove all of our legacy systems into one operating system. So you can imagine how much of a challenge that is. But I think some of our external digital processes aren't updated as often as perhaps we'd like at the moment, and that's probably linked to the fact that we've been working on some of the Dynamics transition stuff. But also, I just think we want to make sure it's the right thing for what our customers actually want and need. And I think as a sector, we're quite paternalistic, at assuming we know best, and assuming that what we think is actually what our customers want. And I think the last couple of years, and particularly the last few months, have really brought into sharp focus the fact that we've had conversations with a number of our customers that we've previously had very little or no interaction with, and it's been a really refreshing, but in some cases at odds with some of our assumptions, that some of the things that they've been telling us. And so it's about ensuring that we've got the right thing, but also that we're not afraid to change it and mix it up as things move along. So self-serve, if people think that people who live in our homes live in some parallel universe, they're just absolutely bonkers, and it's misplaced. In my last role, I got to a position where 9 out of every 10 customer-generated transactions went through an online self-serve route. And that was because it worked. It was smooth. It did exactly what the customers want. It's no more than 3 clicks to get something done. And it was better than ringing a call centre where you have to remember your inside leg measurement and your dog's maiden name before you can actually get to speak to somebody. So, what would you rather have? It's that type of process. So, again, sorry, Brett, you're going to stop asking me these questions, are you? But probably there's no simple answer to this. I think it's quite a complex sort of picture, and I think it's one that's rapidly evolving and has accelerated even more over the last few months, which is why it's probably not as simple as an answer as maybe others could have made it.
Nick, I think that a lot of really valid points, and I think one at the end there you made was around, if you're going to embark on this self-serve digital transformation journey, make sure it's a good one, because I think the worst thing you can do is open up these new channels and create a bad experience, because then you kind of open a whole new world of pain that you weren't previously experiencing.
Yeah, so we've all got, phones like this that are absolutely littered with apps that we downloaded, we thought they were going to change our lives, and we only tried them once and they didn't work, and we've never gone back to them. And you're right, Brett, you only get one go at this. So my view would be self-serve, start easy and work out, incrementally build the service offer and start with the easy stuff. Make sure it works, test, review, and then roll out the next bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, I think we've saw some of that with some of those bigger projects, haven't we, where we've had to be really ruthless at the almost the functionality we've had to cut from early parts of projects to make sure we got early adoption, and we released an MVP that got buy-in and didn't actually cause more disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gets back to that thing of start small, but make sure it's good, because as Brett said, you build that momentum, and people find it convenient. They realise that yes, this is going to add value, and then you can build out from that. We've worked with organisations that come up with this grand plan, And by the time that sees light of day, you've got other businesses that have been out, released 3 journeys, have had buy-in, and they've got that adoption. So, and they haven't not bit off more than can chew, but they've started with the stuff that there's no add value to a customer and they can get out the door. So yeah, I think being real about that MVP and iterative improvement, just getting slightly better is definitely the way to go.
Awesome, great. Well, thanks very much, Andy. Next up, and the last speaker of today is David Norris, who's our performance marketing director. David's going to talk about marketing, how to attract, convert, but I suppose for the purpose of today, how to engage with your audience, your tenants, in a more effective way.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brett. I think from my position, we start with sort of, to use our mission-based analogies that we use in Mediaworks quite often, we talk about maximising your visibility, customer acquisition, and revenue to own your future and drive performance beyond the day. But actually, it's something that Nick mentioned just now that really resonates with me. I think, Nick said, and I quote, and I won't highlight your Yorkshire accent, Nick, but we're less good at celebrating when things go well. And I think that from my perspective, that's an issue that we do see across a lot of organisations that we work with. To go back to our analogy, you've got all the data there. Another point that sort of Dan and Nick touched upon was the fact that the data's there, the data's great. Actually, in the housing sector, it can often be overwhelming, the amount of data that you have from an organisation perspective. You've then also got your brand, so you've got a really clear remit of where your brand's going, and based on some of the points that Jill made, it's about sort of how you push on, how you get that consistency, how do you move your brand so it stays very much front of mind. And then you've got finally your experience. So you've built out, whether that be the self-serve element that we've discussed extensively, or whether that be sort of just apps for general better engagement or for hygiene factors. But then it's a case of, well, how do we communicate that, and how do we actually engage with the audiences that we're looking to? Because from my perspective, one of the things that sort of I wanted to talk about was marketing has got more complex. The reason it's generally got more complex is because consumer and user choice has changed considerably. We're seeing a greater diversity in the way that people engage, the devices that they engage with, the time that they engage with people through. So actually, we've touched on that whole 3-second piece at the start of that. Again, that's different for different audiences. And actually, one of the greatest challenges that we've got as marketers is to strip it back and say, whether we're talking about acquiring customers or whether we're talking about engaging with users, we have to make sure that whatever we're doing is really aligned to those audiences that we're looking to engage with for whatever reason. I think that, this slide here just highlights to me the complexity and the challenges that we've all got from a marketing perspective. And, one of the things that sort of I wanted to touch upon was the fact that, online consumer touchpoints range between 20 to 500 dependent on purchase. And that depends on what you're doing and the level of consumption that you're trying to make, whether it's a complex issue, whether it's a technical issue, whether it's a relatively straightforward issue. But what I would say is we know that we're going to have multiple touch points along the way. So it's not okay to just say we've got a great in-app experience, and we're driving all our customers there. It's not okay to do that anymore, because actually a lot of people might go to search, for example, and search about the issue before they get there. And people might be going out there and looking at your PR element, your reputation, and seeing sort of what other people are saying. And I think for me, actually, when I'm thinking about the Northern Housing Consortium, it's actually a lot about sort of stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement as well. It's not when we're working with, calf kits and we're trying to sell summer bags to a user. It's more complex than that in terms of the decision-making journey. And we have to have an understanding of the customers that we're speaking to as part of that. So I guess I wanted to just highlight, it's a complex journey, but then I also wanted to pull out sort of some of the complexities around that in these key areas. And I think the first point I wanted to make on this was really around understanding what your objectives are. For us, it always starts with objectives. I think one of the things that we've seen that a lot of people get wrong from a marketing perspective is they'll go, Facebook's released this, you can now do live chats, or live stories on Instagram. We want to do that. And I think for us, it never starts with the channel. It never ever starts with, we want to do this on this channel. It starts with understanding the why and starts with understanding sort of what we're trying to drive and the performance that we're trying to get. Is that, you know, we've touched on this today, you know, United Utilities coming to us and asking us to get greater app downloads. Is it, you know, Northern Power Grid talking to us about we want more people using smart meters in their homes. You know, for us, it starts with what's the objective. It definitely doesn't start with the channel. But then once you start to understand that objective and you take a step back, I think the thing that I'd say is that you've now got what I'd like to refer to as a menu. You've got a menu of choices that are available to you, and we work, you know, really closely with all our clients on selecting the right, you know, the right ingredients as part of that menu. You know, and I just, as I say, I want to touch on a few pieces of that today. So from our perspective, search, you know, search matters still. So, you know, when we talk about search engine marketing, we're talking about organic and paid. And this, for me, was really important, where we touched on earlier the notion of those how-to videos. You know, Jill touched on it earlier as well, around it's not cheapest anymore, it's best. You know, people are looking for more and more information online. And as I say, whether that be user experience or a consumption experience, ultimately we're seeing people, you know, 93% of all customer journeys now involve search. You know, that's an incredible statistic, and I will say it again, you know, 93% of all customer journeys involve search. So, you know, even if you think you've built the greatest brand ecosystem in the world, and if you like, we're all, you know, we love First Direct and they deliver some great things. Actually, for a lot of people, they're still going to go outside of that ecosystem and search for additional products, or search for, you know, reviews, or search for insights, because that's just the way that we're sort of built. From a paid search perspective, then moving around into that orange zone, you know, it's the area that I'm responsible for within Mediaworks. We have paid social, paid search, shopping, display and programmatic affiliates. I'm not going to go into what each of those areas is, but I think from our perspective, the challenge here is understanding the waste. So, you know, we know that 37% of marketers waste budget on paid due to typically poor data that you're putting into the system, to touch on the points that Dan and Nick raised earlier, or alternatively, poor platform knowledge. So understanding what you can actually do on the platform. I think for us, where we've seen, you know, real benefits are things like, you know, understanding that customer journey and being able to sequence things like ads. You know, so if a customer sees this, then they see that. You know, that type of insight, I think, is really important when you're taking a user on a journey. And it's not just about sort of being there to smack them in the face at the point of engagement, or the point they want to be. I think it's also about being there and being present in that whole customer journey. I think moving around to content then, you know, content, and the staggering statistic when we were doing the research for this presentation is, you know, in terms of content, we're engaging with typically at the moment 6.5 hours spent each day, essentially engaging with content on different devices. I think that's a staggering statistic, but actually, if you start to reflect on your own behaviour, if you're anything like myself, you probably realise that's pretty actually a damning indictment, but statistically correct. You know, we're engaging with content in a way that we've never engaged with before. And I think that for me, it's that around that, you know, housing associations, we touched on sort of the self-serve element, but I think there's a major piece around that how-to, you know, those frequently asked questions. How do you create content that engages with users and the users that are using your services as well? You know, whether that be through considering the different types of content that you can use, you know, whether that's blogs, whether it's Q&As, whether it's things like this, you know, webinar in an interactive format, or whether it be video, you know, showcasing, sort of premiering some of the really good stuff that you're doing as a business. You know, there's massive amounts of opportunity around the content that you can engage with, and content really does sit at the heart of powering all of these other activities. You've then got media planning and buying. So again, it's not just about, you know, we're talking about all things digital here, but we also accept that our phone's got a place to play. You know, we're seeing more people move to digital, but does that actually create an opportunity for you to use sort of non-digital methods to really create something that stands out in the consumer mind? Or do we create a pattern whereby we have a blended model? where we actually sync what we're doing offline to online. So whether that be something like, we're talking about case studies, we post a nice branded case study for our tenants' sort of mailbox, if you like. And then we go from a digital perspective and share with them a fantastic video that shows the outcomes of that in a more visual way. I think that for us, getting that cut through is the real challenge, and whatever you can do to sort of create that cut through with your tenants to make yourself closer to them is a really positive aspect. And then the final piece, which I think is what I wanted to finish and why I've gone that way around in terms of this from an anti-clockwise perspective in the diagram, is around that PR and reputation piece. What I'd say is that we all know the expression first impressions count. My dad always used to say it to me all the time as a child, make sure you polish your shoes, first impressions count. I think from my perspective, in the digital world, actually first impressions count, but so do second impressions, third impressions, fourth impressions. You have to be there, because actually, how many times have you gone and looked at, booking a hotel or even going to the gym, etc. You're reading into the reviews that people are leaving about your organisation. And from a housing consortium perspective, where you've got quite a complex organisation with quite complex users, if you like, quite a diverse range of users, those reviews and that insight's really going to make a big difference. So is there a way that we can, going back to, less good at celebrating when things go well, is there a way we can get better at that? Putting some great PR stories out there. And I think for me as well, we can't lose sight of the fact that recent statistics suggest that 85% of consumers trust online reviews as much as personal recommendations. We've got to understand that the role of digital is now massive. We do it all the time. We're looking for those reviews. It's not just about speaking to your friends, your colleagues, taking the information that you're getting from the organisation. It's about understanding those Trustpilot scores, those Google reviews, etc. about your organisation, because actually they're going to be the things that a lot of tenants and a lot of stakeholders are making their decisions based on. And I think another angle for me would be, as I say, not just thinking of the end user, thinking of the key stakeholders in that process, and whether that be, influencing friends, influencing family. I think, in supportive or assisted housing is a really important element. So, we then move on to sort of that market navigation, and I just wanted to touch on the complexity of marketing and where we're at right now. Dan touched on the fact that it's not a linear model anymore. We used to look at this and we used to talk about funnels a lot, and frankly, we still do talk about funnels quite a bit. What we understand is that actually it's complex, and we've got this journey that starts with sort of exploration for most people, whether that means that somebody wants to find out more information about a particular thing, or wants to self-serve, or wants, to consider sort of taking up a place as a tenant in your housing association. I think what we'd say is that that's a journey, and we would all accept that that's a journey, and those journeys are anywhere from fairly straightforward to actually really complex, and range from anywhere between probably a matter of seconds to a matter of months. So what we've got is we've got triggers. Something triggers us to use that journey and consider sort of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and whether that be your boiler breaks down. I know we touched upon that earlier, or whether that be you're looking to go move through a new area and you want to engage with a different housing association. There's triggers in that, and then at the end there's conversion. But during the middle, there's what Google will refer to as the messy middle. So Dan touched on this as we went through, and essentially Google will talk about the fact that throughout that there's multiple sort of I always say it's a bit like snakes and ladders. So sometimes you go 2 steps forward, then you go 1 step back because you want to test that knowledge that you've got, then you want to move forward again. But actually the big thing here is you want to do it in a pace that suits you and in a way that suits you as a consumer. You don't want to be dictated to. To go back to Nick's point, why does it work? Why does self-service work, and where does it work the best? It works the best where it's solving a real world solution in a really convenient way, rather than focusing on sort of auto-engineering or over-engineering a particular solution. And then what we would say at Mediaworks is that, to go full circle with this, is that you've got your anchors along that journey, and your anchors should be data, technology, creativity, and strategy. and that actually those points that I made on the previous slide about channels is relevant, but it's not as important as understanding the data, the technology, the creativity, and the strategy that takes us through that journey. So it's about understanding how you move people through that process and through those systems. I think one of the case studies then that we wanted to talk to you about was from, say, Modwin's housing perspective. You know, St. Modwin's are a large sort of a housing seller, builder, if you like. And they came to us with the query of, with an established paid search campaign already in place, we were given the mission to improve performance, increase volume and quality of leads, lower the cost per acquisition. Now, I know some people might be sat on the call thinking, well, that's not really what we do, because that's more about acquiring customers. But I think what I want to just share with you is some of the ways that we went about that and the approach that we took. Because for me, you know, we talk about conversion. That conversion, you know, can be, you know, in building, it can be selling a house, but it can be things like increasing your occupancy level and making sure your occupancy levels are where you would like them to be. It can be about product or service adoption. It can be about engagement. You know, so those conversions don't always have to be the same thing. It's about just taking a step back and understanding that. But I think when it came to St. Modwin's, they were focused on those three areas, you know, improving performance, increasing volume and quality of leads, and lowering the cost per acquisition. And what we would say is, you know, we achieved that. But, you know, the stats you see on screen, 184% increase in new business conversions, 45% reduction in cost, in customer acquisition costs, 56 improvement in on-site conversion rate. I think we're driven by the basis of what we call sort of segmentation, targeting and positioning. You know, it was about taking a step back and saying, right, what are the key segments we're looking to engage with, and not having a one size fits all. So we didn't do a mass marketing campaign. This is really what I wanted to get through. We did really localized campaigns based on the type of accommodation, based on the type of user. So, you know, depending on location, that might be the building, you know, three-story townhouses aimed at the young professional, or it might be that the building bungalows aimed at the older marketplace. And for each of those, you know, locations, each of those buildings, each of those projects, we took a step back and said, right, what are the key segments? You know, what are the targeted approaches that we can therefore use? And how are we going to position our product and our offering from a communication perspective to actually really resonate with the audience? And I think, you know, from our perspective, you know, we've achieved these results as a byproduct of the processes that we've got. You know, it's not just because we're really good at running a paid campaign. It's because we're really good at understanding the process. And I think from my perspective, that would be one of the things that I'd be talking to everybody listening today about, would be around that whole piece around understanding the process that you go through, understanding the segments that you've got, then understanding the targeting capabilities and the channel options that you've got, and then considering that wider positioning piece. So how are you going to position your offer to make sure it's attractive and it engages with the right number of users? You know, and I'd go back to the point that Andy mentioned around 80% of consumers are more likely to purchase when sort of brands offer personalization. You know, to achieve cut through now, it has to resonate with me. You know, if you're like, yeah, anything like myself or like, you know, a number of consumers out there, if it's not personalized, if it's not tailored to my offering, you know, what we saw with St. Modwin's is it wasn't good enough to say we're a house builder, come and move into our houses. It actually needed to be part of that personalization journey, showing the consumer at various stages of that process, through various channels, through various content types, the key messaging and the key journey that resonates with that user. And I think for me, that would be sort of one of the key takeaways that I would say. And I think, you know, going back to the point that Brett made that right at the beginning with the 65% of those how-to videos, it's also about understanding that consumers are often seeking information to inform them as part of that decision-making process. And I think that's a really enormous aspect of what we do. So I guess my final point would be just to remember that consumer behaviours are changing. You know, they're not fixed, and they've never been less fixed than they are right now. So you've got to be flexible in your marketing approach. You've got to keep reevaluating. You've got to have the confidence about understanding those segments, and therefore all of the channels, that menu that I highlighted previously. How are you going to select the right elements from that menu to make sure that you're actually resonating and speaking to your customers, users, tenants in the most appropriate ways through formats that suit their needs? You know, with the wealth of channels available, strategy and creativity alongside harnessing data and technology will be the key factors in achieving performance and that cut through. You know, customer journeys are complex. We've touched on this before. You've got 3 seconds. You know, Nick talked about the fact that you don't even have 3 seconds when it comes to Nick. And I think the point I'd make is that's right. And the way to lose people throughout that journey is really, you know, not to personalize, not to deliver on the platforms where people are engaging, and not understanding the way that you can deliver messages to really deliver that performance.
Thanks, David. I thought it was really, really useful again, and a lot of very, very interesting sort of areas and topics. I know a lot of what we talked about today has been more about that traditional tenant engagement than you know, necessarily tenant acquisition. But equally, I know a lot of housing associations and housing groups now do have kind of, you know, separate associations who are building these houses. I know, Nick, you guys have Space Homes, which is kind of a partner association that's selling these homes as well. Is this something that kind of you guys are looking at, Nick, to target those sort of new tenant acquisition, or how's it approached at the moment?
It absolutely is, Brett. And, you know, we've got a lot of things that David was saying absolutely sort of ticked a box for us. I think it's about how you make the home renting and also the home buying processes as simple as possible. And I think there's a lot of things there that David said that absolutely we cover. I'm conscious of time, Brett, so I'll keep my answer really, really brief on that. So I'll stop there, but there's loads more I could unpack on that.
No, I appreciate that, Nick. Kate, I mean, we've got 3 minutes of our allotted time left. I know some of the Mediaworks guys we can hang about if there's a few more questions, but Kate, I don't know if you want to pick those up and then we can go into the Q&A. Oh, it's Kate here.
Someone always does it, Nick. That'd be me. Sorry, no, it's muted. There's always one. Sorry, no. We've got a question here from Rob Fletcher. So, Rob, we're going to switch your microphone on so you can pause this yourself. But it was for you, Nick, about the Internet of Things. So, I'm just waiting for Rob to come through there. Are you there, Rob?
It's like being at a seance, isn't it? Are you there? Can you hear me?
I'll ask it in Rob's place. I think obviously we're having a bit of a problem with that. So Rob basically said, thanks for sharing your vision, Nick. Moving to a preemptive service model, what role does the Internet of Things play in that? And is that something that you've started to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the 3 key ingredients I talked about before. Internet of Things. If you think about our homes, we still pretty much build and let or sell them with the same sort of fixtures and fittings as we did in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Mm-hmm. It'd be a bit like walking into a Tesla showroom today and them trying to sell you a 1985 Ford Escort with, you know, windy up windows, a tape player, and a choke to get it started on a cold morning. You just wouldn't bother, would you? You'd take the Model 3 and go, you know what, that's the future. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to really embrace and utilize IoT. And the best thing of all is it's now so cheap as chips. It's disposable tech. It's not a capital investment. It's not hardwired. It's plug and play. It's stick on the wall, and use it for a few months or even a few years, and then work on something else. In the same way, you know, very few people on this call will have a phone that's more than 3 years old. Likewise, why do you think IoT is any different?
Thank you. Yeah. We've got one here. It's anonymous, so I'll just pause it again. And I think probably open to anyone, so we'll see who wants to take it first. But this question is, you mentioned designing the website for tenants and for external comms, but how would you approach driving efficiency through digital?
Andy, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of kind of efficiencies in terms of just serving customers. I know Nick touched on that. You know, you might spend 15 minutes on a call dealing with somebody just who could quickly want to make a payment, whereas those 15 minutes could be spent with a customer, you know, who kind of needs that contact. So, you know, you've built an efficiency with the customer, but you've also kind of freed up time for a call center agent to add more value. So I think this efficiency is in that way. I think, you know, there's things like you can use personalization to prompt proactive messages. If if there was a strategy as a business, let's say, to transition people onto direct debits, you know, instead of kind of making one-off payments and cash and having to chase that money in. So actually, if you have a whole strategy around switching people up to set up direct debits, that's going to build efficiencies in the, you know, in the business when it comes to chasing money, you know, or kind of, you know, collecting money from tenants. So I think there's an awful lot of ways that it can drive efficiencies for the business as well as for tenants.
And Andy, I think we spent quite a bit of time, didn't we, especially on the Home Group project and a few of the other projects that we looked at for housing associations, kind of identifying at the early stages, sort of high volume, low value kind of journeys that users were taking. So what were the journeys and the activities that were happening, you know, 300, 400, 500 times a week or into the thousands per month? And that were just really basic, low value activities from a customer perspective, but also from an organization perspective. And we really started with those journeys and trying to crack those first to make the biggest impact. And again, it kind of tied into that board level buy-in. When you can move a dial, even if it's a relatively not that, you know, a small dial, but if you can make a seismic shift in it through digital, we started to see bigger buy-in through to invest more in digital.
Yeah, I think things like understanding your bill, let's say, you know, you might, you know, when bills go out, you have high volume of calls, on just a simple explanation around the bill. You know, you can put that online as just basic Q&A. You can build out interactive versions of the bill, which has hotspots with helpful tooltips and advice. So if you think about an influx of kind of calls that might come through a call center, let's say, just to explain the breakdown of a bill, where you could facilitate that online with content, and then that's actually preventing a contact, not necessarily actually just serving it through, you know, an alternative method like live chat or something like that. So, you know, understanding your bill was a huge one, Brett.
Yeah.
I'm really conscious of time because we are sort of over slightly. Are there any sort of final thoughts from you, Nick, or from you, Brett, that you want to say before we wrap up for the afternoon?
Nick?
Hey, thanks. 3 quickies from me. We're living through a revolution at the moment. We're living through a revolution in terms of how we work and how we think about things like the 20-minute neighbourhood. Like most revolutions, you don't realise it's happening until you go out the other end, and then you look back and you think, blimey, that was a period of change. Unless, of course, you lived through the French Revolution and you were part of the middle class, in which case you lost your head and you didn't get through the revolution. But that aside, the point being, that revolution provides us with an opportunity. I would say grasp that opportunity that the pandemic has offered to us all for change, as a virus for change. I think secondly, be clear on the purpose or the strategic aim that you're trying to achieve, whether that's with your shift to digital or in terms of your marketing and brand. And third, and probably most importantly of all, be yourself. In terms of that brand promise is so key, and it runs through like blood through veins, really, everything that you do. Sorry, some really bad analogies there, so I'll go on mute and let Brett come in with something more sensible.
I mean, I second everything Nick said, especially about the French Revolution and hopefully not nobody losing their head in the next few months. But yeah, for me, it would be first party data, you know, embrace that, access it, do everything you can with it. Think about that consistent brand experience. You know, don't alienate traditional channels, but if you're going to go on the digital journey, make sure they're awesome and make sure they're better than traditional too, and encourage adoption without forcing adoption. And then, you know, finally, you don't have to make giant leaps from the off. You know, small steps can move big dials. So, you know, and get your buy-in, and it's, you know, this is a long-term journey. So don't feel like you have to, you know, complete it in a month or 6 months or 12 months. You know, this is a journey you're going to be embarking on for the next how many years. So, but the key thing is just to get started. Yeah, and Mediaworks would love to support you with that if we could.
Thank you. So I think a copy of the recording will be made available for delegates today. So contact details and things are on there if anybody would like them. Huge thanks to the whole team at Mediaworks. I found it absolutely fascinating. I had a load of notes of comments, things that I wanted to get us to discuss, but we've run out of time. Maybe next time. Massive thanks to you as well, Nick. Really appreciate your time coming along and joining us today. And thanks to everyone who has made it 5 minutes over the final finish time. Thank you very much for joining us. And please do get in touch with any one of us if you'd like any further information going forward. So thanks again to everybody and take care. Hopefully see you again soon.